The courtroom buzzed with an unusual energy that morning. It was supposed to be another long day of drawn-out arguments, technicalities, and routine legal sparring. The public gallery was half full, the press row scribbling in their notepads, cameras stationed outside waiting for quotes to trickle out. To most it looked like any other high-profile trial. But to those who paid attention closely, there was a storm building. At the center of it stood a defense attorney, sharp suit, smug grin, and a stack of papers he shuffled as if the rustle alone could intimidate. From the very start, his confidence wasn't just confidence, it was arrogance. He leaned into every sentence as though the courtroom was his stage, his performance designed not to win over the judge, but to dominate the room. "You see, Your Honor," he began, voice booming in an almost theatrical cadence. "The prosecution's entire case is flimsy, built on speculation, nothing more than smoke and mirrors." A few people in the gallery exchanged looks. They had heard this tone before, the kind that stretched words thin to cover the absence of real substance. The attorney strutted, flipping through pages, tossing around legal jargon like confetti. He was convinced he was untouchable, untouchably clever, untouchably above the process. But if you looked closely, you could already see the cracks. The judge, an experienced figure with decades behind the bench, sat stone-faced, hands folded, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. This wasn't his first time hearing a lawyer mistake arrogance for argument. He had seen it countless times before. Attorneys who thought the louder they spoke, the truer their words became. The tension ratcheted higher when the attorney tried to deliver his killer point. He stepped forward, looked the jury dead in the eyes, and declared, "And let us not forget, there is absolutely no precedent, none whatsoever, that supports what the prosecution is claiming today." A bold line. Too bold. Because the moment the words left his lips, there was a ripple in the room. The prosecution's lead attorney smirked, shaking their head. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Even a juror raised an eyebrow. Those who knew the law knew this wasn't just wrong. It was absurdly wrong. The judge's eyes snapped up. For the first time that morning, he moved. Leaning forward, his gaze sharpened like a blade. The silence that followed was deafening. The attorney, still smirking, seemed oblivious. He thought he had landed his haymaker. He thought the silence meant he had stunned the courtroom. But then came the voice. Steady, low, unflinching. "Counselor," the judge said, the weight of authority in every syllable, "are you seriously trying to argue that no precedent exists? Because that, sir, is absolute nonsense." The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Someone in the back whispered, "Did he just say that?" The stenographer's fingers stumbled over the keys for half a second, as if even she had been caught off guard by the bluntness. The attorney froze. His smirk cracked, melting into something closer to panic. He fumbled with his papers, buying time, eyes darting toward the jury as though they could rescue him. They couldn't. In that moment, the performance was over. His act had been ripped apart, not by a clever opposing counsel, not by a dramatic revelation, but by the one person in the room whose voice could not be ignored, the judge. And this wasn't just interruption, it was a dismantling, a public stripping down of arrogance, layer by layer, until all that remained was embarrassment. The attorney tried to respond, voice shaking ever so slightly, but the damage was done. "Your Honor, I only meant," the judge cut him off with a raised hand. "No, counselor. Words matter. Facts matter. And what you just said is not grounded in either. Do not waste this court's time with baseless claims." The audience shifted again, the energy transformed. This wasn't a lawyer in command anymore. This was a man exposed, laid bare in front of everyone. And here's the thing. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the gavel. He didn't need theatrics. Truth has a way of standing on its own. And in that silence after his words, the truth roared louder than any argument. Commentators watching from the media seat scribbled furiously. They knew they had just witnessed a viral moment. This wasn't just legal back and forth. This was raw drama. A clash of arrogance and authority that the public would eat up, dissect, replay. Because arrogance, when unchecked, can convince you you're invincible. But in a courtroom, there is always one figure who keeps arrogance in check. And on this day, with one sharp line, The judge reminded everyone who truly held the power. But here's the question. What happens when that moment leaves the courtroom? What happens when the clip gets shared, dissected, and amplified beyond these four walls? Because the real story wasn't just about what the judge said. It was about how the world reacted when the mask of arrogance fell away, live, in front of everyone. And that is where the drama was only beginning, to be continued. The silence after the judge's sharp rebuke lingered like smoke in the air. Everyone felt it. The courtroom wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest, demanding you acknowledge what just happened. The defense attorney's hand twitched on his stack of papers. His lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time that day, his swagger was gone. He looked less like a commanding presence and more like a man cornered with no escape. The judge leaned back, eyes still locked on him, waiting. It wasn't just authority, it was a challenge. Say something, dig yourself deeper if you dare. Finally, the attorney cleared his throat, forcing out a chuckle. It was weak, strained, a desperate attempt to reclaim his lost composure. Of course, Your Honor. What I meant to say was that while precedents exist, they're not directly relevant here. That's the distinction I was making. But his words wobbled. The jury shifted uncomfortably. They could tell this wasn't confidence anymore. It was scrambling. He had been caught, and now he was trying to reframe his mistake as if the court had simply misunderstood him. The judge raised one eyebrow, unimpressed. "Counselor," he said firmly, "this is not a stage for word games. Precision matters. Do not twist your misstatement into something it was not. You spoke with certainty, and you were wrong. Own it." The gallery stirred again, half in shock, half in awe. This wasn't just a correction, this was accountability. The kind that stripped away excuses and demanded honesty in real time. The attorney tried to recover with another line, reaching for authority he no longer had. "Your Honor, I believe the jury can decide for themselves how relevant these precedents are." It was a last-ditch pivot, throwing the decision toward the jury, hoping to redirect the moment. But the judge didn't let go. "No," the judge snapped, voice sharp as a whip. "The jury will decide facts. I decide the law, and the law is clear. Do not confuse them with your evasions." The words landed like a gavel strike. The jury glanced at one another, some nodding slightly, some smirking as though they had just watched a schoolteacher dismantle a student's flimsy excuse. The courtroom dynamic had shifted entirely. The attorney's shoulders slumped. His power in the room had evaporated. He wasn't in control anymore. He was being controlled. And that's when the whispers started. From the gallery, "He just got wrecked." From the press row, that's the headline right there. From one juror, barely audible, a quiet, involuntary chuckle. That chuckle cut deeper than any legal argument. It wasn't cruel. It was human. The moment the jury laughed, even slightly, the attorney's credibility cracked in half. No matter what he said next, the echo of that laughter would haunt every word. The prosecution seized the opportunity. Rising slowly, deliberately, their lead attorney addressed the court. "Your Honor, with respect, I believe this is exactly why our argument stands. Because there is, in fact, precedent after precedent, clear, direct, and well-established, that supports our case. I'd be happy to provide the court with citations, should there be any further confusion." It was a dagger wrapped in politeness, a quiet, devastating blow. And the judge nodded, as if to say, "Yes, that's how it's done." The defense attorney sat down, deflated. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled his papers, but no one was paying attention to the documents anymore. They were watching him, watching the transformation from arrogance to desperation unfold in real time. The judge, sensing the moment had stretched far enough, finally spoke with finality. "Let's proceed." It was simple, direct, but the underlying message was clear. The showboating was over. This trial would not be hijacked by theatrics, not in his courtroom. But while the proceedings resumed, the energy in the room never truly returned to normal. The tension had shifted, and the spectators knew it. They had witnessed a moment that would echo far beyond these walls. Because this wasn't just legal sparring, it was a rare glimpse of raw accountability. A moment where power tried to posture, and truth smacked it back down. In the jury box, one member scribbled notes furiously, not about the evidence but about the moment. It was seared into memory now, impossible to shake. In the press section, journalists were already drafting their leads. Judge calls out attorney live in court. Absolute nonsense. They knew a soundbite when they heard one. And in the gallery, people whispered to each other like they had just witnessed a live performance, except this wasn't theater, this was real. The defense attorney tried to speak again later, but every word felt smaller, weaker, overshadowed by the earlier exchange. Even when he made decent points, the weight of his credibility was gone. He had lost not just an argument, but the aura of authority that carried him. And the judge? He didn't need to say another word. His earlier rebuke hung over the courtroom like a shadow, a reminder that truth had already spoken. The trial continued. But the story, the one the world would remember, was already written. Still, the question remained. How far would this moment spread once the cameras, the headlines, and the internet got hold of it? Because in the age of viral clips and instant outrage, courtroom walls could no longer contain the drama. This wasn't just about one attorney's arrogance anymore. This was about how quickly truth, when spoken with authority, could cut through the noise and dominate the narrative. And the narrative was just getting started. To be continued. The trial was still underway, but outside the courtroom the story had already slipped free. A single phrase, those sharp, undeniable words from the judge, had been captured, clipped, and sent into the digital bloodstream. It started small. One journalist in the press gallery, quicker than the rest, tweeted, "Judge shuts down defense attorney. Absolute nonsense." Whole room froze. Within minutes it was reposted, retweeted, and reframed with commentary. This is how accountability looks. By the time court adjourned for the day, the clip was everywhere. On YouTube it was titled, "Judge calls out lawyer, epic mic drop." On TikTok it was cut down to a 30-second edit, complete with dramatic background music. On Instagram, the line was turned into a meme template, pasted over everything from sports arguments to family squabbles. The moment had left the courtroom. Now it belonged to the internet. Commentators jumped in almost immediately. Some praised the judge as a rare voice of honesty in a world of spin. "This is why people are losing faith in institutions," one commentator said in a viral reaction video. "Because too often lies go unchecked." But here, in real time, the judge called it out. Others took aim at the attorney. Clips of his face, frozen in that split second of shock after being shut down, circulated with captions like, "When you realize you messed up," and "Caught in 4K." His attempts to recover were clipped too, but they only looked weaker when contrasted against the judge's firm command. Even late-night talk shows picked it up. The host grinned as the clip played behind him. "You know it's bad when a judge says that. Usually they say, 'Overruled.' This time he said, 'Get out of here with that nonsense.'" The audience roared. The attorney had gone from respected professional to national punchline overnight. But not everyone agreed. A counter-narrative began forming. Was the judge too harsh? Some pundits argued that while the attorney's statement was wrong, the public humiliation might have crossed the line. "Judges are supposed to maintain decorum," one legal analyst said on a news panel. "By calling it out in such blunt terms, he risks appearing biased in front of the jury." And so the debate began. Was this accountability, or was it overreach? The internet didn't wait for nuance. It split instantly into camps. Judge for the win versus Tark's unfair court. One side hailed the moment as justice in its purest form, while the other painted it as a power move that undermined fairness. Meanwhile, the attorney himself became a reluctant star. His name was suddenly everywhere, paired with headlines he never wanted to see. Paparazzi hounded him outside his office, shoving microphones in his face. "Do you regret your statement in court? Do you feel humiliated by the judge's words?" He tried to brush it off. "It's part of the job. Sometimes you win arguments. Sometimes you lose. I stand by my advocacy for my client." But the internet wasn't convinced. Clips of that interview were dissected, tone analyzed, and mocked for lacking sincerity. His shrug became another meme. When you pretend you refine, but you re-not. The judge, meanwhile, became an unlikely folk hero. Old footage of his past rulings resurfaced, pieced together into montages titled, "The Judge Who Doesn't Play." Fans created fan pages, praising his no-nonsense style. One video even set his famous line to a remix beat, turning it into a trending audio clip. The trial itself faded into the background. The legal arguments, the evidence, the witnesses, none of it captured the public's attention the way that single moment did. What mattered wasn't the verdict anymore. It was the clash of personalities, the raw exposure of arrogance and the authority that smacked it down. Inside the courtroom, jurors couldn't escape it either. They weren't supposed to see coverage, but whispers trickled in. Family members, co-workers, even strangers brought up the viral clip in casual conversation. Some jurors tried to block it out. Others couldn't resist peeking at headlines. And though judges give strict instructions, the reality was clear. Once a moment goes viral, it's almost impossible to contain. Legal experts began weighing in on national TV. "This may go down as one of the most memorable courtroom moments in recent history," one said. "It reflects a cultural hunger for honesty, for someone to just say out loud what we all feel. Enough nonsense." But then came the backlash. Some advocacy groups accused the judge of grandstanding. Op-eds appeared. When judges become celebrities, justice suffers. Editorials warned of a slippery slope where courtroom authority turned into entertainment. The judge, however, stayed silent. No interviews, no comments, no statements. His silence only added to the aura. He didn't need to explain himself. The clip did all the talking. Back in court, the attorney tried to recover his footing, but it was impossible. Every time he rose to speak, eyes followed him differently. Even the jury seemed less receptive, less forgiving. He wasn't just a lawyer anymore. He was that lawyer, the one the world had laughed at. The prosecution capitalized on it, subtly but effectively. They spoke with clarity, with composure, always contrasting their professionalism with his floundering. And every time the judge looked his way, the air shifted, as though everyone was waiting for another correction. The courtroom had changed forever, and the trial was no longer just about evidence. It was about narrative. And narratives, once unleashed into the world, take on a life of their own. For the viewers at home, the clip was more than entertainment. It was symbolic. Some saw it as hope, that even in places of power, nonsense could still be checked. Others saw it as proof of bias, a system stacked against anyone who dared to challenge authority. But either way, no one saw it as just another day in court. Because once a moment escapes the walls it was born in, it doesn't just belong to those who were there. It belongs to all of us. And this moment? It was far from over. The world was watching. The internet was roaring, and the courtroom still had days, maybe weeks to go. Which raised the biggest question of all. If one line could create this storm, what would happen if another one dropped? To be continued. The final days of the trial carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters crowded the back rows, scribbling notes with restless energy, cameras flashing outside the courthouse like a storm that never let up. Inside, the air felt charged, almost electric. Everyone knew the end was near. But the real tension was just about the verdict. It was about whether the courtroom itself could withstand the pressure of its newfound spotlight. The attorney at the center of it all looked different now. Gone was the swagger, the sharp tongue, the dismissive smirk that had once carried him through arguments. In its place was something quieter, thinner, a man weighed down not only by the case but by the ridicule of a nation. Every word he spoke seemed haunted by the memory of that one sentence, the judge's booming dismissal that had branded him with humiliation. The prosecution sensed it. They kept their strategy clean, direct, and confident, letting the attorney's missteps echo louder than anything they said. They didn't need theatrics anymore. The courtroom had already provided its viral moment. All they had to do was steer the ship toward the finish line. But the attorney wasn't ready to sink quietly. In the closing arguments, he summoned everything he had left. He stood tall, his voice carrying across the room with renewed energy. He painted his client as misunderstood, framed the evidence as inconclusive, and reminded the jury of their duty to weigh facts, not emotion. For a moment it almost worked. His rhythm returned, his words landed sharper. Whispers flickered across the room. Could he actually pull off a comeback? Then it happened again. As he reached for a bold flourish, trying to twist the narrative into something that sounded noble, the judge leaned forward. His voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "Counsel, I will not allow you to rewrite reality in this courtroom. Stick to the evidence. Enough of this performance." The words landed like thunder. Gasps shot through the gallery. Some clutched their mouths, others exchanged stunned glances. It was happening again. The judge had cut him down in full view of the jury. The attorney froze. His face flickered with the memory of the first humiliation, the viral clip that had already circled the globe. And now, here it was again. Another public rebuke. Another undeniable strike against his credibility. He stumbled through the rest of his closing, his momentum shattered. The prosecution followed with calm, steady precision. Their arguments weren't flashy, but after the storm, their clarity felt refreshing, even comforting. When the jury left to deliberate, the courtroom exhaled. The gallery buzzed with whispers, reporters scribbled like mad, and the attorney slumped into his chair, staring at the table as though it might offer him escape. Hours passed. Then the jury returned. The four persons stood, holding the envelope. The silence was thick, heavy, almost unbearable. The verdict was read aloud, clear, final, undeniable. A ripple ran through the room. Some gasped, others nodded. The attorney sat motionless, absorbing the blow. His client buried his face in his hands. The prosecution allowed themselves the faintest sigh of relief. But once again, the verdict wasn't the story. The story was the judge. His words had shaped the narrative. His interruptions had redefined the trial. And his unflinching demand for truth had become the moment that outshone everything else. Within minutes, the second outburst was clipped, uploaded, and shared. "Judge destroys lawyer again," blared across headlines. TikTok filled with side-by-side edits comparing the two moments, the first humiliation and the second. Hashtags surged. Whar truth overspin. Judge V's lawyer. Whar courtroom mic drop. Legal analysts debated the implications. Some argued that the judge had risked appearing partial, that his blunt language might become grounds for appeal. Others countered that he had simply defended the sanctity of truth, protecting the jury from manipulation. But the public didn't care about nuance. They cheered the judge as a cultural icon, a figure who spoke the words they wished they could shout at every politician, pundit, or liar they'd ever seen. He had become more than a judge. He was a symbol. The attorney, meanwhile, tried to fade from view. He declined interviews, ducked reporters, and canceled appearances. But the internet never forgets. His name remained tied to those viral clips, his legacy rewritten not by his years of practice, but by two sentences that cut him down in front of the world. For weeks, the debate raged. Was this justice, or was it showmanship? Did the judge uphold truth, or did he blur the lines of fairness? The argument spiraled across news networks, social media, and op-eds. But in the end, one reality was undeniable. The courtroom, a place where truth is supposed to be weighed carefully, had collided with the speed and fire of the digital age. And in that collision, one man's arrogance had been shattered by another man's authority. The audience at home, watching the clips again and again, felt something deeper than entertainment. They felt a reminder that in a world flooded with spin, gaslighting, and manipulation, truth still had the power to land like a hammer. Sometimes, it only takes one voice to call out the nonsense. One sentence to stop the performance. One interruption to remind us all of what matters. And that is why this moment will not be forgotten. Because it wasn't just a courtroom clash, it was a cultural reckoning. And as the credits rolled on this trial, the final line belonged not to the attorney, not to the prosecution, not even to the jury. It belonged to the judge, whose words will echo far beyond those courtroom walls. Enough of this performance. The internet turned it into a catchphrase. The people turned it into a movement. And history may well remember it as the day a courtroom became a stage where truth itself fought back. So here's the real takeaway. Whether you cheered or cringed, whether you saw it as justice or overreach, you couldn't look away. That's the power of truth. It commands attention, it cuts through the noise, and it leaves no one unchanged. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we needed to be reminded of.